Hi, this is Dennis with Second Chance Tackle. One of the requests that I got recently was to do a freshwater rear drag fishing reel, and so I've selected the Quantum QVI20. It's a nice little bassing reel, nice little pond reel, and we're going to take it apart, show you how to service this thing and how to keep it going for quite some time to go. So we want to remove the core components. You'll start with the handle, and then we'll have to remove that case and the rotor and make sure that it's tuned up properly. So I'm just removing the handle right now. The handle comes off with a through screw. You can tell that because when you're spinning your handle, if this little screw here is spinning on the other side, then you know you've got a through screw. I'm going to take the spool off at the same time. And what we'll do is we'll come down here, remove the case. That'll show you the core gearing. We'll also remove the rear drag system just to check it. And to do that, there's a rubber boot on here. Sometimes you'll find rear drags will have a screw underneath here. Various ways to attach it. This one just simply has a rubber boot covering the attachment mechanism. And you need to take this off because there's two screws on the side plate up top. There's two under here. You want to make sure that you have them all. Otherwise you won't be able to separate the case. Okay, so you'll see I'm just kind of pulling with even pressure on both sides until we get that rubber cup off. Then there's a little clip here. It's about a 180-degree clip, and that needs to come out, and I use a pin to get that clip out. And then one of the only scary moments in this reel is there's a little, I call it a rocket pin because it tends to shoot, but there's a little pin in here that makes that click. It's on a spring, and so you want to hold this as you take that off until you clear it. And you can see I've just cleared it here. I can take it off at this point. You'll see it's lodged in the hole here, and if you're not careful, you'll either lose that and lose the click, or you're going to have that shoot out, and that's because it's sitting on a spring. I think you can see the spring better in this illustration here, or perhaps on my gloved hand. I wear a glove just to keep the chemicals and stuff on a reel off my hands. I also use a parts basket, as you see over there, to keep all the pieces and parts. Once you do that, you can take this collar off, and that collar is actually protecting two screws underneath. Sometimes you need a little wedge like this little utility knife. And if you're not familiar with the reel, if you don't work on these frequently, I suggest you take some pictures. I'm taking pictures right here, right now with the video camera, but you could use a cell phone, you could use a digital camera, or you can take pictures of your own videos to show you the sequence that you took these off. And more importantly, when it's time to go back in, you'll remember how they go back in. So there's 4 screws. I'm taking those out. They're Phillips head. And as you'll notice in my tool tray there, I keep a lot of tools close at hand just in case you need something else. But right now it's, for the most part, it's going to be a Phillips head, and it's going to be a small wrench. Now I'm laying these screws out on the table in front of me here because I want to make sure that the screws are all the same length. If they're not, then I want to make sure that I note where those small screws come from. And sometimes in a reel like this, where you have screws buried underneath a cosmetic detail like that trim ring, sometimes those screws are smaller. So you just want to make sure that you got it right. In this case, all 4 of these screws are the same, so they can go in my parts basket. And then we can remove the case and get to the gearing. Again, I'm just going to use that utility knife as a lever to detach that, and in this case it's actually pulled out the main gear as well. These reels are relatively simple, and they're simple because the drag is below. So we have an axle shaft, we have a crosswind block, we have a crosswind gear behind that. In this case it looks like a bushing on the other side, and we have a pinion gear that the main gear drives. The smaller gear on the back side drives the crosswind, which makes the shaft go up and down. Okay, I'm going to take this off then. This is a little C-clip that's going to fit in grooves on the axle shaft. And again, I want to protect those small pieces. That's why I'm using that parts tray over there. And then once you take that screw out, you should be able to remove that locking mechanism. You can see it kind of is like a door, and it slips into 2 grooves on the axle shaft. You want to remember the orientation on that, so it's down and then a flip when we go to reinstall. With that, I can pull the axle shaft out, place that in the bin. I can also take the crosswind block off and take the crosswind gear off. And that's basically the mechanicals of this reel. We'll take the drag piece off in just a moment to show you what's under the drags there. But these are the mechanicals, and all they need is lubrication at this point. This is a relatively clean reel. And then on the mechanicals, we have the, we already took the boot off. You can then unscrew. When you unscrew, you're going to have a spring which applies the tension on the drag. And then this is the outer screw which does that. And then we should have a drag assembly in here. It should be able to just push through. Just going to use a pin to do that to show you the drag assembly. And this is common for most of these reels. Quite honestly, I've never seen the drags wear out on these. So we have a hard washer, felt washer, metal washer, and another hard washer up top. That's your drag stack. All this drag stack needs in this case is a little bit of oil. I'm going to use some Real X oil here just to lubricate those drags. I'm just going to put that drag assembly right back in. That was really for the purpose of just showing you. But you do want to check them, inspect them, make sure that they are in good condition. If not, you'd have to go and find replacements. All right, and then this just goes in. And we just want to screw that back in. Sometimes you can use that little boot that we had to do that. And that's your drag. So let's go ahead and just clean off and lube and put back into place the main gear assemblies. And as you'll see, it's a relatively simple reel. There's just not that much that needs to be done on this one. You want to keep it clean. And since most of these tend to be in fresh water, you don't tend to get a lot of corrosion, saltwater corrosion or intrusion from these. But what you do tend to do is you tend to get dirt. Sometimes it's just because it's been on the side bank of a river or something. And in all cases, that needs to be cleaned. Otherwise, that's going to bog down the performance of this reel. Okay, so I'm just going to grab a little... I use screwdrivers to drive some people nuts, but I'm going to grab a screwdriver to place grease onto the teeth. I'm checking the teeth all around on that main gear, make sure that it's in good condition, no broken, chipped wears, anything like that. And this reel doesn't look like it's gone fishing much, but we're going to do that annual service anyway. Okay, that main gear is done. Come back and do the crosswind gear then. Same idea, check the teeth. You don't want to overload with grease, but you want to make sure you have enough that it operates smoothly. With the crosswind gear, this one can simply be reinstalled right now because that's the last piece that came out. That just fits on the stud. I'm going to check the crosswind block, and this is clean, so we want to make sure we get a little bit of lube into that channel there. That's going to assist the axle shaft in going up and down. I'm going to put the main gear in after we lube the pinion gear. So again, a little bit of grease up top on that. And that'll work its way in with the main gear, so you don't have to worry too much about that. This is the anti-reverse override. We're just going to put a shot of oil onto that pivot point there. And then we're going to put the main gear back in. Then I'm going to go up top for a moment, take this assembly off. This assembly is the rotor. I'm going to make sure it's clean underneath. There's no indication as to why it wouldn't be clean underneath. See if we can get that little set screw out with my screwdriver. We can. So this is just the back of the handle threaded knob there. Now we just want to find the right wrench for the rotor nut. This is why I keep a lot of these on hand, because you're never quite sure which one it's going to be. Okay, and this, you'll notice that I started turning one way and felt resistance. That's because this nut tightens opposite what is traditional. So traditional would be the old righty-tighty, lefty-loosey. In this case, it's the opposite. So I'm going to just hold those two to the side, pull this off. And we've got a collar up here. It's sealed. If we want to get underneath, this is very clean. There's no reason to do that. But it's a clean reel. We're just going to throw some oil in here. What I was doing is inspecting for dirt up here, making sure that if this thing did get dunked in the water or something, that was taken care of and would be cleaned. And we're going to go right back and assemble the rotor. And again, it's the reverse for tightening now. So what you would traditionally use to loosen is you're going to tighten. So you're actually turning counterclockwise here to tighten, making sure that that's tight. And then I have that little screw there, and I'm going to use a micro screwdriver to put that little screw back in. And that set screw there is intended to hold the rotor nut in place so that it doesn't loosen. You'll know it's loosened if your rotor has a rock to it, and if your spool is lining with like a figure 8 of a line. In other words, it's not an even wind on it. Your line is kind of bunched. And those of you that watch these videos know I have a little bit of trouble with these parts. This one seems to be particularly irksome. Somebody told me dip it in grease to hold the top. We'll do that right now. We'll see if it makes a difference. There seems to be a lot of different tricks. So we can hold it that far anyway. Alright, well there you go. So another lesson learned there. If you want, you can use a little grease to hold the tip of the screw. Okay, with that done, I'll make sure that our axle shaft is clean. When it is, you can use that gloved hand to grab a little bit of grease and just slide it and work it on there. You don't want to put too much grease onto an axle shaft because it's only going to jam up on the top of the pinion as you work your way down. It'll just jam up there. It'll be useless. But work the axle into place. It's a D shape, so you want to just make sure that they mate properly. There we go, and then it needs to sit into the just working on getting it into the, there you go, into the drag assembly. Once we do that, we can find that clip again, and we can align those two slots. This is where it was important to remember what the orientation was, and that's that. There we go. Then you can reseat that clip, and then because we have all these pieces in a parts bucket here, it's relatively easy to find them on the reassembly. And go lock that down. And we have a bearing on this side, so we want to oil that bearing before we reinstall. I like to flood it again with the Real X oil. And then we're ready to close this side up, so we can just snap the case back on. Sometimes easier said than done. There we go. Nice snap there. We get those 4 screws. Now they're all the same. We noted that, so it doesn't matter which piece goes in which hole. Again, if they were different, you would have noted it, and sometimes those lower levels here have the smaller screws. So just pay attention to that when you're redoing this, and you'll find you'll save yourself a couple of quizzical looks there when you're trying to figure out why one doesn't seat properly. Okay, so we'll just tighten these up then. And I use the manual screwdrivers. People ask about the mechanical screwdrivers. I don't recommend them. I think they over tighten the cases because of the torque. But if you're going to do that, if you need to do that, then I would say that the thing I would recommend you doing there is to make sure that you leave it short and then finish the last turn or 2 by hand. That way it's not going to risk being over tightened. Okay, we got all those screws in. And we'll just go down below. We'll reseat the kind of the drive button. And remember that crazy little rocket spring there. So we want to set the rocket spring aside. We want to put the trim ring on. Now the trim ring has two little indentations in it, so you got to get it oriented properly. Okay, so we've got it oriented properly. It's a nice tight seal. We're ready to put the adjuster onto the bottom of the reel. And there's one thing you'll recall. We have that little, what I call the rocket spring. It's a little top and spring, and that just seats in the hole prior to putting the cap on. And there's no pressure on this spring, so you can simply lay it in there. The pressure comes when you go to load the cap on. So we're going to go ahead and grab that, and then all you have to do is you seat the cap. You want to press down with your fingernail or something else just to put enough tension onto that you hold it. And then you can hear it. It's operating properly. Once you do that, it's time to put the cap retaining clip back on. So you can seat that into one side, hold it, it's a spring, and then clip it into the other side. And now you have the adjuster on your drag knob. And then we have that little rubber boot in this case. Again, sometimes you'll see a screw that'll hold this mechanism in this case with the Quantums. It happens to be by this spring clip. And then this just gets pressed on. Simply seat it properly like that. And we're in good condition. We want to put the spool back on. That just snaps in place, the handle. And then we'll give it a test drive. The only other piece we would lube at this point would be the bail assembly. And you don't have to take the bail assembly off during a routine maintenance. If there was something wrong with the tripping of the bail, you certainly would do that. But in this case, we're just going to tighten the handle up first. Make sure that it's operating properly. One more turn there. We're going to put a little bit of oil onto the line roller. And I just like to throw a little bit of oil into each of the two bail sides. And then just flip it and make sure it's working properly. So there you go. That's a 20 size Quantum QVI20. It's a rear drag assembly reel meant for freshwater fishing, and that's how you service it. So I hope you've enjoyed the video. If you did, please like it. If you want to see more, please subscribe. And if you have any questions or comments, please leave them, and I will get back to you with a response. Thank you again. This is Dennis with Second Chance Tackle.